after the awesome days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we move towards the festive days of Sukkot. And Sukkot is a unique festival in many ways. Unlike its partners Pesach and Shavuot, there is something universal about the festival of Sukkot. For example, the Talmud tells us that if you count up the sacrifices that were brought throughout the festival of Sukkot, you'll see that there were 70 bulls. And explains our sages, this corresponds to the 70 original nations of the world. The Jewish people were bringing sacrifices on their account to assist them, to atone for them. And hence the statement in the Talmud, what a sad day it was, not just for the Jewish people, but for all of the nations of the world when the temple was destroyed, because now there was nobody to bring sacrifices on their account. Also in the Haftarot that we read over the festival of Sukkot, there is mention of a time in the future when all of the nations will come up to the temple in Jerusalem, specifically on the festival of Sukkot. And the Talmud goes a step further in analyzing this passage. And it says that a time will come in the future that God will sit down, so to speak, with the Sefer Torah in his bosom and say to the nations of the world, whoever has fulfilled what is written in here, come and receive your reward. And all of the nations will scramble over one another and run to try to prove that they have indeed been faithful to God. And everyone will be pushed aside. Eventually they will turn to God and say, you didn't give us the same chance that you gave the Jewish people. Why don't you give us some laws? Why don't you give us some mitzvot to fulfill? See that we will fulfill them, and then you can give us reward. And God says, fine, I have one mitzvah that I'm going to give you. And this mitzvah is called Sukkah, the mitzvah to sit in a simple hut during the festival of Sukkot. Go out and build a sukkah and sit in the sukkah. And so it will be. Different nations of the world will go out and build a sukkah, and they sit in the sukkah. And then the story continues. God will bring out the sun. It'll be very, very hot. They'll be so uncomfortable in these huts that they will just leave the sukkah in irritation. The actual wording is they will kick the sukkah and leave. And therefore God will turn back to them and say, I gave you one mitzvah, and you weren't able to fulfill it. Now here the commentators ask an interesting question. Why should God be so upset with the nations of the world when they leave the sukkah when it gets very hot? That's the law in the Talmud, even for a Jew. If the sukkah is uncomfortable, if it's too windy, if it's too rainy, if it's too cold, if it's too hot, you can leave the sukkah. Even a Jew would leave the sukkah. So why are the nations of the world being discriminated against because they leave the sukkah? But the question is really one of attitude. In that story, it mentions that they will leave the sukkah in disgust, kick the sukkah, and leave. And here's the difference. It could be, perhaps, that a Jew might have to leave the sukkah. Perhaps it's raining, it's unpleasant, it's cold, there's insects in the sukkah, and you're entitled to leave under those conditions. But the Jew will leave with a broken heart. They weren't able to fulfill the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. Here, these different nations of the world will leave in a sense of disgust. Oh, we can't do this mitzvah. We're not interested in the sukkah, and they'll leave and they'll kick the sukkah. So the attitude is everything. What is your outlook towards a mitzvah? If you can't do it, how do you feel? Do you feel, well, now I don't have to do it. I have this burden off my shoulders. Or is your feeling, I really wanted to do that. I wanted to have this connection with God, and now I've been deprived of the opportunity. But it also tells us an important principle. As the Talmud tells us, Shelot tehei mitzvot beziot alav. You should never treat a mitzvah in a degrading way. A mitzvah, something associated with a mitzvah, should always be beloved to you. If you have a sukkah, treat it with respect. A Sefer Torah, treat it with respect. A Siddur, treat it with respect. If you're not able to do it, don't walk out with a sense of disgust. And there's a beautiful story to illustrate this. This story I heard from my Rosh Yeshiva. In the famous yeshiva in Budapest, there was one place available for a student. Only one place available. And students were coming in and coming out and being interviewed. And the Rosh Yeshiva in the end decided to choose a particular boy who wasn't that bright, but he felt he was a good boy. Well, the other members of the faculty came to him and said, why did you choose this boy over that boy? The other boy was much brighter. he would have fitted into the yeshiva much better. Why did you choose him? And the Rosh Yeshiva explained as follows. I was sitting in my office watching what was happening as the students were coming into the interview. It was just after Sukkot, and the sukkah had been dismantled, and the schach, the foliage from the roof of the sukkah, was lying on the floor. This very bright boy walked to the interview room and walked right over the schach with no regard for it whatsoever. The other boy, not as bright, came to the schach and did a U-turn, walked around it. And I decided that's the type of boy I want in my yeshiva. He has respect and he has love for a mitzvah. And that's really the idea of Sukkot. Sometimes we're not able to sit in the sukkah. We're not able to perform mitzvot, but what is our attitude towards it? Do we love it? Do we admire it? Do we cherish it? That's what this festival comes to teach us, and I wish you all a Chag Sameach.